this morning we are tackling a topic many of you thought would only happen much later this century.
Remember the Human Genome Project? That's where scientists unveiled all the chromosomes that make us who we are. Well, not all those chromosomes have been identified. British researchers are now allowed to work on a radical form of gene transplant. It could wipe out some diseases such as Down syndrome, but it could lead to designer babies.
Yeah, designer babies. It is a complicated process, so we're going to try to simplify it so you can discuss it with your family and friends. Now, Dr. Jeffrey Steinberg is a reproductive endocrinologist, and he joins us from Los Angeles to really show us some insight into exactly what this is. Doctor, when we say designer babies, what do you mean? That you can pick out height, gender, eye color, hair color, those kinds of things?
Well, we don't look at designer babies the same way we look at designer outfits, for example. We've just been handed a roadmap to the human genome, and what we're doing is we're taking a ride through the city, learning about the turns and the intricacies of where we want to go.
All right, so well, let's talk about what science knows right now as we look ahead, but let's talk about what science knows right now. Science can determine whether a baby is going to be a boy or girl, and it can single out whether a couple wants a boy or girl, correct?
Absolutely correct. We do this on a daily basis.
All right, what about diseases? How does this play into this?
Well, we've got a list of over 200 diseases now that we know the genetic makeup of. So as we identify each one of these genes, we have the ability now using procedures like multiple display technology, and we can look at those genes, find out if they're there. If they're there and the couple doesn't want them to be there in their child, we can make arrangements to assure that that doesn't happen.
Make arrangements, I see. All right, let's talk about this in the most simplest of terms. Are we talking about in vitro fertilization, and is it safe for the baby?
Yes, well, of course, we can't take a bad gene and replace it with a good gene yet, although we'd be very interested in doing that. All we can do is we can study what nature has done on her own. And if she has placed a gene into an embryo that we know causes harm to that embryo and perhaps to that child, we can make sure that that embryo is not used to help this couple become pregnant.
Well, could this then lead, with these designer babies, lead to people having designer babies just so that they can be used to help their other children who were born and created the old-fashioned way, as donor babies perhaps?
It's already been done. The British have done it, and several other countries have done it. You know, children are born with the potential for all kinds of diseases. Some happen early, some happen late. If a disease happens early, for example, leukemia, and the bone marrow is destroyed, they need a genetically very close matched donor to be able to allow them to survive. And parents have arranged to make sure that embryos carrying a very close match to their first child are produced to help that first child.
You know, it's one thing to help a child survive, but it's another thing when couples say, you know what, I just want a girl. I just want to make sure that we have a girl. And so with this technology, will it allow doctors to basically allow for more boys to be born? Would it change the whole makeup when it comes to boys and girls on the earth? And what about race? I mean, there's so many issues here.
Well, this has been the ethical criticism of the technology, choosing boys and choosing girls. The criticism has always been you're going to upset the balance of the world. And of course, I work with a lot of female embryologists that are leaders in their science who are outraged about the thought that if you give couples a selection, they're preferentially going to choose boys over girls. It's simply not true. There are papers published, 2 others prior to ours, and we've recently produced some very interesting data that shows when you let people choose, they choose 50-50.
And ethically, I've got to ask you this, as a doctor, is this playing God?
No, it's not playing God. What we're doing is we're studying God's work. We're studying God's creations, we're analyzing it, and we're learning from it.
Dr. Jeffrey Steinberg, reproductive endocrinologist, thank you for your insight today. Tony?
You're very welcome.
Okay, Betty, when we start discussing a subject like designer babies, the word eugenics comes to mind. And that often has very negative connotations, including memories of Nazi Germany. Jonathan Moreno is a biomedical ethicist at the University of Virginia, and he joins us from our Washington bureau. Jonathan, good to see you this morning.
Morning, Tony.
When you get down to the bottom line on this, cut through it all, we're talking about at least the controversy seems to be around this notion of the embryos, what happens to the embryos when we've gone through this selection process. Isn't that where the real controversy is?
It is. I mean, I think we have to worry about this dilemma that we're really going to be facing a lot, I think, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, Tony, in the future. On the one hand, we don't want to disvalue people who have disabilities by selecting for children that will not have certain genetic disorders. On the other hand, we do want parents to be able to make decisions about what's best for their children.
So what's the balance? What's the balance we need to be thinking about now? And clearly it's an issue that you're talking about probably most every day.
It is, and you know, unfortunately we don't really know not only where to draw the line, but should society, should our political system even be drawing these kinds of lines? Or isn't this something that really needs to be decided by couples and families? It really is a very interesting problem. And you know, down the road, Tony, there are whole groups of people who are not going to be able to afford these technologies. Yeah. And you're going to be in a very interesting situation, I think, in which not only the sort of traditional inequalities among people and groups of people are going to be problematic, but also these inequalities that are created by the fact that some people can afford to have children with certain characteristics, some will not be able to. It's really a fascinating problem.
Let me have you respond to this. Are we treating offspring like a commodity?
Like commodities.
Yeah, are we?
Well, it's the commodification that we worry about. But you know, here's the problem. Some of us can afford to give our kids tennis lessons and math tutoring, and some of us can't. We're shaping our children now in low-tech ways that are traditional, and we think that's fine. Who would object to people being able to do that for their kids?
Let me try this one. If the baby was being created, say, to provide bone marrow for a sick sibling, you'd be introducing that baby to a process that is very painful. So how do you feel about creating a baby to remedy an existing problem in a child that you already have, but subjecting that new child to pain?
The discomfort seems to be really not an issue for these children. Some parents have been able to do this for their children who have bad diseases, and they've been able to have other children that can help them. And we also know that those children are loved when they're produced in that way to help a sibling, if it's possible to help a sibling. That one doesn't raise a big problem for me, I have to say.
Eugenics. What does it mean?
Well, in the old-fashioned Nazi era, you know, it meant the state deciding what kinds of people there should be. We're in a different situation now where it's sort of bottom-up eugenics, potentially, Tony, where people will be making decisions about the qualities of their own children. Let's imagine a lot of people decide to have blonde, blue-eyed children.
Yeah.
You know, well, do we have an Aryan, nation because of individual decisions people decided to make, rather than because of decisions the state decided to make? In China already, there is an imbalance of boys and girls. The boys are more valued in that culture than girls, and that's going to be a big political issue for that country and maybe for the whole region and the world in 10, 20 years.
Okay, Jonathan, let's take the other view of this, and you've touched on it. What about the hope that this science gives to families of having a way to control the disease in another child by creating a healthy child who has the genes, who has the stem cells that can be of help in curing that disease in the child that is here and unhealthy?
Well, we're already doing that to some extent. There's going to be more of that. I don't have a big problem with it because, again, the experience is that these children are loved. But hopefully we're going to be getting to a point, Tony, with regenerative medicine where we'll be able to use our own cells and tissues to cure ourselves, and that's really where we need to go.
Jonathan Moreno, a biomedical ethicist at the University of Virginia. Good debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is a really controversial issue, and a lot of people really hot over it on both sides of it. So we'll see where that goes.